All right. Okay. Chapter 17. This is another easy chapter, but there is quite a little bit of math. Okay. So make sure you understand the math. Okay. I mean, the math is not hard. It's just like multiplication, addition, subtraction, but you have to like follow what's going on. Okay. 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 The respiratory system function. Um, an exchange of gases between the atmosphere and the blood. The respiratory system is also um, responsible for homeostatic regulation of body pH. Okay, and that's kind of the faster the faster way your body regulates body pH. Okay, depending on your respiratory rate, I can tell you if you're in respiratory acidosis or respiratory alkalosis, something like that. So you can regulate pH by how much CO2 you breathe out. Okay. Okay. So flow. Okay, we discussed earlier. Flow takes place from high regions of higher to lower pressure. So air is a fluid. Okay, so you can have flow of air. Okay, a muscular pump creates a gradient. The resistance to airflow is influenced primarily by the diameter of the tube in which the air is flowing. And this is what makes diseases like bronchitis and emphysema and cystic fibrosis and all this other lung disease is so bad. It changes the diameter and disease I'm trying to get out of my head is asthma. Okay, we'll discuss asthma because asthma really, really has to do with the diameter of the tubing more than other two. Okay. All right. So this stuff you should already know from anatomy. Okay. This stuff you should again know from anatomy. Okay. So this stuff you should already know. So okay. You should definitely know this. And now we're actually talking about in anatomy we talk about the flora, but we don't actually talk about what it's for and all this other stuff. Now we can see. Okay, so there's the lungs. Okay. So this is all lungs, this is all anatomy stuff. Okay, the pleural sac. Okay, the pleural sac forms a double membrane surrounding the lung, similar to a fluid-filled balloon and surrounding a water-filled balloon. So what the anatomy book example is actually better. It's like your fist, right? And then your hand surrounding your fist, punching into the balloon. That balloon is the pleural cavity. Okay, the pleural cavity is not actually a very big cavity. It's really, really, really thin, but it is there and it is important. Okay. So when we talk about lung diseases, it does play a huge role. Okay. Okay. Just look at so here you can see the cross-sectional area gets bigger and bigger and bigger as you go down. So it's easier and easier for gas exchange. So the alveoli where the gas exchange actually happens. Okay. Okay. This stuff is all anatomy, so you just go over it. This stuff is also all anatomy. Okay. Okay. Okay, airway epithelium. This is all anatomy, so we'll skip that. Okay. The airway epithelium, the one model is secretion by airway epithelial cells. Okay. Okay. So here you have the apical ion channels, including CFTR, allow chloride to enter the lumen. So chloride enters the lumen here. Okay. Water follows the chloride. Okay. NKCC brings the chloride into the epithelial cell from the extracellular fluid. Okay. And sodium, you use a sodium potassium pump for that ultimately. Okay. And so the NaCl movement from extracellular fluid and lumen creates a concentration gradient. So water then flows into the lumen. Okay. The Na goes from the extracellular fluid, okay, to the lumen, driven by the paracellular pathway drawn by the electrochemical gradient. So, and that's how you get saline in the lumen. Okay. Now, imagine that this is gone. If this is gone, then this is gone. So no more no more water, no more sodium, no more chloride. So the most important thing is no more fluid. Okay, so that becomes super thick. Okay, there's actually some amount of salt in here, but no water. The water is following the sodium and the chloride. Okay, so when this whole thing shuts down, you end up with mucus, really thick mucus. Instead of the epithelium being nice and wet and moist, it ends up being sticky and mucousy. And that ends up trapping bacteria, and that ends up causing um, illness, right? Infections. That's why the channel is called a CFTR, cystic fibrosis transmembrane regulated channel. Okay, it regulates chloride. Okay. Okay. Gas laws. Okay. The most important law that you have to know is the ideal gas. So ideal gas law, right? PV equals nRT. Okay. Okay. So if you hold V constant, okay. So V if you hold these constant, then V is roughly equal to 1 over P. Okay, so if I change the volume of the gas, okay, the pressure decreases and vice versa. Okay, in the human body, we can assume the moles are constant, temperature is constant, so R is by definition constant, and therefore the volume is equal to 1 over the pressure. Okay, so if I decrease the volume, okay, I increase the pressure. Okay, if I increase the volume, I decrease the pressure. Okay, so if I'm breathing, as I breathe in, I'm going to open up my lungs and that's going to increase the volume. If I increase the volume, I decrease the pressure. Okay, the pressure inside my lungs. If my diaphragm contracts, then I decrease the volume and I increase the pressure. Okay. Okay. And that essentially is Boyles law. Okay. Okay. Dalton's law says the partial pressure of gases is the sum of all the individual gases. That's what you have to know. Okay. At sea level, the partial pressure of the atmosphere is 760 millimeters of mercury, or 1 atm, and 21% of that is oxygen. So 21% of that partial pressure is oxygen. Okay. So if that if that changes, okay, then so what's the partial pressure? You can calculate the partial pressure being 160 over 160 mmHg. Okay. Okay. So when you look at flow of gas, you always want to look at pressure of oxygen in area A, or sorry, not oxygen in particular, but pressure in area A and pressure in area B. And whatever direction the flow is in will equal. They'll try to equalize. Okay. So for example, when we breathe in oxygen, assuming we're about atmospheric pressure, the pressure of the oxygen is going to be 160 millimeters of mercury. Okay, the air that's inside our lungs is less than that. Okay, I believe it's something like 50. Like, I don't remember what the value is, but 160 is bigger than that. So air will flow, oxygen will flow into the lungs. Okay. The partial pressure of carbon dioxide is much less in the atmosphere than it is inside our lungs. So carbon dioxide will push out. Okay. 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 All right. Okay. Okay. So more definitions. Okay. Respiratory cycle, one inspiration followed by one expiration. So the couple definitions. Tidal volume is what you guys are breathing right now. Okay, the volume that moves during a respiratory cycle. Okay, we'll add one more thing, at rest. Okay, tidal volume is usually measured at rest. Okay, and then the inspirational reserve volume is the additional volume above that tidal volume that you should purposely breathe in. Okay, if I say, suck in as much air as you can right now and take a deep breath, okay, that is the inspiratory reserve volume. Okay, the expiratory reserve volume is you breathing normally, and that asks you blow out as much as you can, and you blow out without sucking in a deep breath first. Okay, you blow out. That's the expiratory reserve volume. Okay, the residual volume is the air in your lungs even after maximum exhalation. There's always no matter how much you purposely exhale, there's going to be some residue of air left over inside your lungs. Okay, and that's the residual volume. Okay. Okay. Oops. So the vital capacity is going to be the reserve inspiratory volume, okay, plus expiratory volume and tidal volume. Okay, this is a really important value because it tells you how well your lungs are functioning. How much gas can you exchange at maximum? Okay, the total lung capacity there is a typo here. Okay, and there should be plus the residual volume. Okay. Okay. Yeah, there's a typo there. Okay, so make sure you get that in your notes as well. Okay, so yeah, enjoy this video. I like these guys. They actually explain things rather well. Okay. Share screen. Share slide.
Breathing. It's something we do all the time, but how often do you actually think about it? Not too often, I imagine, unless suddenly it became more difficult to breathe. In this video, we're going to look at how clinicians assess someone's lung function with a device called a spirometer. For this demonstration, we're going to use the classic Collins spirometer because it makes understanding pulmonary function tests much easier. The Collins spirometer can also be called a wet spirometer because this air-filled bell floats on water inside of this green cylinder. This figure shows you a spirometer in cross-section. When Michael puts in the spirometer mouthpiece and clips his nose off, he creates a closed system consisting of his respiratory system, the tubing, and the air inside the bell. The bell is connected by pulleys to a pen that will follow the bell's movement along a moving sheet of paper. Here Michael's hooked up to the spirometer, breathing quietly through his nose. I'm going to start the chart paper while he clips his nose shut. This will create the closed circuit with the spirometer so that all of the air he breathes comes from the bell or into the bell. You ready, Michael? Notice that when Michael breathes in, the bell comes down, causing the pen on the paper to go up. And then when Michael exhales, the air goes into the bell, causing it to rise, and that the pen goes down. With the spirometer, we're able to measure the air movement from the lungs and assess Michael's lung function with a few simple breathing maneuvers. The most basic breathing maneuver is quiet breathing, which will allow us to measure Michael's tidal volume, or the amount of air he can move in a single inspiration or expiration. Our next maneuver is going to involve Michael taking in as much air as he possibly can after his next normal inhalation. Are you ready, Michael? Okay. Breathe in. Good. Good job. The additional volume Michael inspired above his tidal volume is his inspiratory reserve volume, or his IRV. If we calculate it from the graph we see here, we can tell that Michael's IRV is 2,400 milliliters. This next maneuver is very similar in that we're going to have Michael try to expel as much air as he can after his next normal expiration. Are you ready, Michael? Whenever you're ready. Out. Good job. The amount of air Michael forcefully exhaled after the end of his normal expiration is called his expiratory reserve volume, or ERV. In Michael's case, it's 2,050 milliliters. The sum of Michael's tidal volume, inspiratory reserve volume, and expiratory reserve volume is called his vital capacity. Which lung volume have we not been able to measure yet? It's Michael's residual volume, something we can't measure with the spirometer. We have one last test to run, his forced vital capacity test. We're going to ask Michael to take in as much air as he possibly can and as quickly as possible exhale as much of that air out. Are you ready, Michael? Breathe in, and out. Push it out. Good job. Let's take a second and see what that looks like. The most important part of this test is his FEV1, or forced expiratory volume in 1 second. This test tells us something about the condition of Michael's lungs and airways. If he has narrowed bronchioles like in asthma or stiff lungs, his FEV1 is going to be less than expected for his sex and age. In this video, we've demonstrated how to measure the 3 lung volumes that make up the vital capacity and how to do a forced vital capacity test. Today, in a clinical environment, to do spirometry, you'd probably see small computerized electronic devices that did this all for you. And it doesn't change the information, how well do you breathe?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so that actually is really cool, except like nobody uses those machines anymore. That's like 1980 stuff. But it actually shows what it records. And like yeah, the three numbers are really important, right? So four numbers actually: the tidal volume, the respiratory reserve volume, um, and inspiratory reserve volume. So those three numbers together combine to form a fourth number, which is the vital capacity. How much air you can exchange from the environment. The FEV1 is how much air you breathe out in 1 second after sucking in as much air as possible, and that's actually a measurement that tells you the health of your lungs as well. Okay, not just how much of your lungs is functioning, but how healthy it is. Okay. Okay. So there's no way to really measure residual volume like that clinically, but usually about 1200 ml here. Okay. Okay. So the total lung capacity is about 6 liters. Okay, in females, in males, and about 4 in females. Okay. Okay. So you can see that here. Okay. You're lifting, you're lowering the diaphragm, you're lifting the rib cage, and that makes the lung bigger. Okay. Flow is roughly equivalent to change in pressure over R. Okay, the diameter. Okay. Sorry, not diameter. I don't know why I said diameter. Resistance. Okay. Change in pressure over the resistance. Okay. Just like it is for blood vessels. Okay. Um, okay. So there you go. Changes in pressure. Okay. Okay. When you breathe in, okay, the uh, so if you look at the alveolar pressure, it goes below and above 0. Okay. So as alveolar pressure decreases, goes negative, that means the pressure on the outside air is higher. As the air in the outside world is higher, it's going to come rushing into your lungs. Okay, when you breathe out, okay, the pressure is going to be negative, it's going to be positive. That means there's more pressure in your lungs and outside world, so you're going to push air out. Okay. 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 What's important here is you see the interpleural pressure. The interpleural pressure is always going to be negative. Okay. The interpleural pressure always pushes, so the pleural fluid pushes the fluid against the chest wall. The negative pressure in there always forces the lungs to expand. Okay, so okay. The sub-atmospheric interpleural pressure is always going to be negative. Okay, that means your lungs are always going to be expanded against the wall. Okay, of your thoracic cage. Okay, so when you get a pneumothorax, so this is a pneumothorax, air in the thoracic cavity. Okay, they call it air in the lungs, but it's not air in the lungs. It's when you puncture through the thoracic cavity. Okay, then the atmosphere is equal and air will. So if you get stabs like they're doing here, or if you like, it's not just getting stabbed. Okay, occasionally you break the clavicle and that punctures your lung, right? So when it punctures the pleura, what happens is now the air from the outside will equalize the pressure, and all of a sudden the lungs are no longer expanding because you're no longer under negative pressure. So so there's no more expansion. Air will come rushing in, and that will equalize, and that's no longer there's no longer a negative pressure, and so the lung will collapse. Okay, that's what. Okay, once the wound is sealed, then the lungs can re-expand. Okay. 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 Lung compliance and elasticity might change in disease states. Okay. The compliance is the ability to stretch. Okay. Your lungs normally should have high compliance. Okay. If it's low compliance, it requires more force. Okay, to expand. And so you see this in respective lung diseases like fibrosis or inadequate surfactant production. Okay. The last is the ability to return to resting normal when there is so elastic ability is the ability to return to normal. Okay. Compliance is technically stretching. Okay. Okay, surfactant decreases the work of breathing. Okay, so one of the things about water that's great and wonderful is that they stick to each other. Okay, and therefore they create something called surface tension. Okay, water tends to stick to each other. Okay, so it generates a force, a pressure of holding things together. So, and that makes it hard to breathe because when you breathe, you want to pull apart the water molecules. When you want to pull apart wet tissue, you want to pull apart the water molecules. Okay, so the effect, surfactant decreases the work of breathing. This is the law of Laplace. Okay, okay, the pressure is equal to 2 times the tension divided by the diameter. The radius of the water molecule. Okay. So there you go. Okay. One of the things that occurs in preemies is they produce inadequate surfactant. So a surfactant is a surface active agent that disrupts the cohesiveness of the water, and that makes the water, the tissue easier to expand. Okay. Okay, so small plus. Okay. Okay. So the factors that affect airway resistance. Okay. Okay. So the liquid system is always constant. The viscosity of air is close to being constant. Okay. The diameter of the airways, the physical obstruction, the bronchial constriction or dilation. Okay. 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 The most important thing for resistance is the diameter or the radius of the airways. Okay. The wider the airway, the less the resistance. So if I double the radius, then my resistance decreases by not double, not triple, not quadruple, but 16-fold. Okay, so changing the radius of the airway changes things a lot. Okay, so and we primarily when we control it, using the parasympathetic and sympathetic mechanisms for bronchial dilation and bronchial constriction. Okay. Okay. The rate of death determining the efficacy of breathing. Okay, so the ventilation rate is really simple. The ventilation rate is the number of breaths per minute. Okay. By the way, funny story, you can never directly ask the patient for to breathe normally to measure their ventilation rate. Every time when you do that, they become conscious about it and they start screwing it up. Okay. You're supposed to just watch them breathe and count ventilation. Okay. And it should be about 12 breaths per minute. Okay. But usually I'm talking, or you say you sit still for a couple of minutes or a minute and then you just watch them breathe. But don't tell them, oh, I want to count the number of breaths per minute. Like, and they'll start like, breathing incorrectly. It's kind of weird. Okay. So ventilation rate is how many breaths per minute times tidal volume, right? The air exchange in each breath, and that will tell you the total volume of total pulmonary ventilation. Okay, it is about 6 liters per minute. Okay, you usually take about 12 breaths a minute. Each breath is exchange of 500 ml of water, or air. So total 6 liters of air per minute. Okay, that's under normal conditions. Okay, resting conditions. Okay. All right, so they explain that here. Okay. Alveolar ventilation is more accurate, but much harder to measure. So don't worry about that. Okay. 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 Yeah. Okay. So, okay. So here you can see maximum voluntary ventilation, like is much higher than normal. So you can breathe in tremendously more air than when you want to. Okay. Okay. The O2 enter alveoli is roughly equal to O2 enter the blood. Okay. The fresh air in the lungs is approximately 10% of total lung volume at the end of expiration. So again, you don't when you're normally breathing, you don't exchange that much air in the environment. Okay. All right. Yes. Okay. So as alveolar ventilation increases, the alveolar PO2 increases and the alveolar CO2 decreases, right? So as you breathe in, you get more and more, like if you breathe in more and more, you get more and more oxygen, you breathe out more and more carbon dioxide, right? And this is actually really important, okay? Okay. All right. Okay, so skip this one. Okay. All right. All right. One last slide to go over. Okay, obstructive lung disease is airway resistance, so asthma, sleep apnea, COPD. Okay, so there is nothing wrong with the lungs themselves. Okay, there is something wrong with the airway. Okay, restrictive lung disease, there's nothing wrong with the airway. There's less lung compliance. Okay, and so one of the ways to measure the difference between the two is measure the vital capacity ratio versus the FEV. The FEV1 is a forced expiratory volume in 1 minute. Okay. Okay. For obstructive lung disease. Okay. Oops. Text. Okay. Let me just change this picture. Okay. For obstructive lung disease, the forced vital capacity will be the important thing is that this is somewhat normal. This is decreased, but not really that much. Okay. The forced vital capacity doesn't change. Okay, but the forced expiratory volume in 1 second is decreased. Okay, this should be second, not minute. Okay, yeah, that's a big huge typo. Which we'll get to. Okay, so it's hard to get because there's an obstruction, because the airway is smaller. It is harder to get air out suddenly. Okay, therefore the FEV1 ratio is this is smaller, this is equal, so the ratio will be decreased. Okay, your total lung capacity isn't affected in any way because the problem is actually your airway, not your lungs. So your total lung capacity is either normal or even increased because you're trying to get air in, so you're working out your lungs, so the lungs are actually bigger. Okay. For restrictive patterns, that means your lungs are damaged, so your forced vital capacity is decreased. Okay, the amount that you can breathe out is pretty much normal. Because the thing that's most decreased, it is this number. So your the ratio is actually more likely to be increased because the FVC goes down. Okay, and then the total lung capacity also goes down because again, restrictive diseases damage lung compliance and stretchability of your lungs, and that means they can't store nearly as much air, but you have less problem for forcing it out. Okay, all right. Hopefully that makes sense. All right. Go back to this. So that is not 1 minute. That is 1 second. Okay. Sorry, this is a new set of slides that I'm using this time around. So, okay. So here, this is the forced capacity test. Okay. So you can tell this guy actually has volume exhaled. So subject A is worse. Okay. Okay. So the FEV1, this guy can exhale 4 liters. This guy can only exhale 2.5 liters. Okay, so this is going to be restrictive, right? If subject B is normal, which basically is, and subject A is going to be have a restrictive disorder. Okay. All right. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay.